Okay, so today we are going to take a look at Viking geography and ships and how the geography of where they lived and their eventual shipbuilding impacted their everyday lives. During this video, your job will be to complete your guided notes and answer any open-ended questions that are located on those notes in full sentences. If at any point I am moving too fast, please make sure you pause the video to get the information you need or replay parts of the video. When you get to the open-ended questions, pause the video and answer the questions before moving on. It will make your life easier. I may at times have to move myself around in my little box just so it's easier to see visuals. I will make that happen as needed. So with that, let's begin. So starting off, the Vikings were originally from 4 main countries: Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. Norway is where we get the term Norse from. That is the other term we use for the group called the Vikings. This area is known as modern-day Scandinavia. These countries are located in Northern Europe. So think about what the climate might be like there and how that might have changed their lives compared to someone living in Italy, or Southern Italy at the very least. Okay? Feel free to pause the video as needed. So I am moving on. Okay, on your notes, answer this question. How do you think the Vikings were able to travel to the different countries they called home? What mode of transportation do you think would have been the most effective / efficient travel at this time? Pause the video, and then when you're ready, hit play. Let's continue. Okay, so the land itself, the areas where the Vikings called home were mostly rugged forests and really sharp rocked, rugged coastlines. The coastlines themselves are very iconic. I have an image up top of one of the actual coastlines. You can see the giant chunks of rock sticking up, and there's not really a beach. It's more of like rocky gravel. But they're so iconic that modern day pieces of pop culture that utilize Vikings as their inspiration use this coastline as part of their imagery. So the perfect example, I think, of this is the How to Train Your Dragon movies. So I believe on the bottom here, this image is actually from the second movie, but it's showing you the giant upcroppings of rock that existed on the coastline. And it does, whilst it's fantastical, it's definitely a children's cartoon, it's animated, it does resemble the real life thing. So when you're watching Toothless and Hiccup fly around the rocks, that's based off a real life location. So again, pause if needed. Otherwise, I'm moving on. So continuing on. The southern part of Scandinavia had many natural harbors, and they could farm there. It was definitely a little warmer. This land was known as Jutland and would be considered a part of modern-day Denmark. Because of the large plains there, the Vikings were able to grow grains and have livestock that they were able to put out for pasture. So they had cattle, sheep, which again, How to Train Your Dragon decided to take a nod from and have our friends, like my friend who is behind me right now, right here in the movie. They also raised pigs, and they could use these livestock for food purposes. Some of them could be used for tilling the land, like the cattle, or in the case of the sheep, they could use the wool to make clothing. So they had multiple purposes. The rest of Scandinavia wasn't so great for farming. The soil was really, really rocky, and because it got very cold there because of the climate, the seasons for growing crops was really too short to do anything. Due to this, they turned to the sea to make a living. They used the many fjords that were around to trade, and eventually they would use the fjords to launch their Viking raids, to go a Viking. Because remember, Viking is technically a term. It's a verb. It's not just the name of a group. So a fjord is a long, narrow, deep inlet of the sea between high cliffs. I know you need to copy down this definition, so pause if needed, but I'm going to continue on to the next slide so I can show you an image of a fjord. Fjords or the real life fjords on the right here, and cruises go in them today. They are massive. They are not just like a little inlet, like a river. They are massive. And again, they are so iconic that modern day pop culture has decided to utilize them as part of their imagery when referencing this area of the world. So you might not think of the Frozen movies when you think of Vikings, but Frozen is located in Norway. It's where it's set. So Anna and Elsa's castle is located on a fjord. This iconic body of water, is what saved Viking culture. Without the fjords and eventually them venturing off into the sea, the Viking culture probably would not have lasted as long as it did, because just from sheer survival. All right, in your notes, I want you to answer this question, so make sure you pause the video so you have time. How else do you think the Vikings utilized the seas/fjords to survive? So beyond just going on raids. Think about why other civilizations tend to settle near water sources. Pause the video, answer in full sentences. When you're ready to continue on, hit play again. All right, now we're getting to the fun stuff. We're going into ships, which I know some of us are very excited for. So Viking ships were built using the timber from those really thick forests that they settled near. And they were very, very large. They were trading ships and warships, but we'll get to that. They were suited for long voyages because think of it. We've talked about trade before, especially if you've had 6th grade social studies, which I know all of you have because I've had some of you. Trading over water takes a lot of time because, especially at this point, there's no ships. Like, it's not like a modern day sailing ship. It's not powered through electricity or gas. It's man or wind powered. So it's going to take a while. So you want to be able to bring back as much as you can on every single trip you take. So the bigger the ship, the more it can carry, the better off you are. This is a real life, still existing example of a Viking ship. It is in a museum. I forget which one off the top of my head. I will find that out later for you guys and let you know. But because these examples exist, we actually know a lot about how Viking ships were built and how they functioned. And we've actually been able to recreate them using the same building methods within reason. We have lost some of the materials to time, but an approximate, pretty close recreation, and shown how they were effective tools. The ship bodies were very long and narrow, and they tended to curve up on the side, and the sides allowed for 16 sets of oars when they were the bigger ships, because they did have smaller ones too. And usually the Vikings did do this like they did in the TV show The Vikings from the History Channel a few years ago. They would put their shields on the side. It served the dual purpose of, yes, it protected them from any potential attacks that they might have encountered while they were sailing. Because remember, a lot of sailing trips were either trade trips or Viking raids, which can be dangerous. But it also served as a permanent storage space for those Viking shields. So they didn't have to worry about, well, where are we going to put this when we bring back stuff? They had a spot for them to exist. And they would need the shields when they would go on land. Because again, in a lot of cases, they were going a Viking and attacking places. Ships were built using the clinker method. So clinker-built ships are built with the planks overlapping each other. So there's a slight overlap, which you can see in the image, and also kind of what I'm doing with my hands. Okay. They were riveted where they overlapped, and then they actually put tar over the edges so it would seal it. Typically tar and either cotton or flax, which is a plant fiber, to kind of fill in the gap, and then that would seal it and make it waterproof. When building in a clinker-built ship method, you would build the outside shell of the boat first. So they would build those overlapping plank pieces first off the keel, the bottom part down here. Okay, it kind of looks like a Superman, like a T, or almost like the Superman symbol, cut apart a little bit. And then you would build up and create the curved body of the boat. And then they would put the frame inside using these things called ribs, just kind of like a rib bone. And what that would do is the outer shell would be very strong, but also slightly flexible, which would allow it to sail and not get super damaged if they hit really rough water. But that bottom keel and the very strong ribs would give it the sturdy structure so it didn't just break apart. This is just another kind of labeled part of the ship, so you can see the different cross sections. So you have the keel again, you have the different planks again overlapping, and then you have your cross ribs right here to help strengthen the ship. So when we think of the Vikings, I know many people tend to think that they are just kind of very bloody and bloodthirsty, no time for art kind of people, which is completely untrue, especially if you remember our discussion about their metalworking. They liked art. They just incorporated it into their everyday useful items. So decorative carvings on ships were a big thing. The very first ship I showed you actually had like a curved front to it, but this one actually had the head of an animal at the front, and then it has the gripping beast aesthetic, kind of like we talked about before. These carvings were normally of dragons, but they could be of many different animals. And the thought was that these carvings of fearsome creatures would actually scare off enemies or evil spirits. Remember, Vikings had a religion and they followed it. It guided their everyday lives. And this is just another aspect of that. So in addition to the oars, they also utilized large square sails. They tended to have a striped pattern on them, and these were typically put together just the same fabric they would have used to make the clothing. It was typically stronger depending on the way they wove it, and they were massive. Okay, it took men to hang them because they were so big. They often named their ships in the following manner: snake of the sea, raven of the wind, lion of the waves. Think back to mythology and why might they have named them like this? Okay, think of the different figures in Norse mythology and why these specific animals, especially the raven, would have been important to name their ship after. Think about why it was important for them to have another method other than traveling by oar to be a method to power their ship. All right, last thing. Let's talk about some navigation. So Vikings did not have GPS. I know that's hard to think about because we are so used to just pulling out our phones and using GPS to travel and figure out where we are going, but didn't always exist. So typically ships would use a compass and the stars to navigate. Vikings didn't have access to a compass. They would actually navigate using the position of the sun and the stars, but when it's cloudy, you can't see the sun. So they tended to run into an issue. So when it was cloudy, they would use something called a sunstone. The first mentions we have of the sunstone can be found in the Prose Edda, which is, again, the main source of information we have about Viking mythology. Due to this, many scholars thought the sunstone was a mythological creation rather than a physical tool until relatively recently, when we've started to do more science-influenced research. Okay? So because it was mentioned in the Prose Edda, we didn't actually think it existed. We just thought maybe it was something they had named the sunstone. We didn't think it was an actual piece of stone. But what it is actually a piece of quartz, and they would cover it in certain spots with material, and they'd look through it and they could see the sun's location through the clouds because of it would travel and, like a crystal, narrow the light, and they could figure it out using the sunstone. I do have a video for you guys to explain how that works way better than I can because I am not a science teacher. So finish copying your notes for this, and then on the next slide is the video. I'm actually going to let you guys watch that on your own. Okay, it is on your note slides as well. Answer any of the questions that are on there as needed. If you have questions, please message me on Schoology. I will get back to you as